Have you ever found yourself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you've done enough, been enough, given enough for your children? Maybe you've skipped meals, silenced your dreams, or pushed past exhaustion just to see them smile. But deep down, you still feel something missing, like you're trying to hold together a bond that's quietly slipping through your fingers. If any of this sounds familiar, please know you're not alone. So many women in their 60s, 70s, even 80s carry a silent weight, the unspoken fear that if they stop giving, they'll stop being loved. We don't talk about it much, but it's there, in the way you tiptoe around their moods, in the way you hesitate before saying no, in the ache that follows a cold glance or a quiet rejection. We call it love. But is it really? Today we're going to talk about something that may feel uncomfortable at first, but it's necessary, freeing even. We're going to talk about why trying to constantly please your children isn't love, it's fear. And how that fear, if left unchecked, can slowly erode not only your relationship with them, but your sense of self. This is especially important for women our age. Women who have given so much, often without complaint, often without recognition. You've spent decades nurturing, sacrificing, showing up. And yet here you are, still wondering if you're doing it right, still trying to earn something that should have been yours all along: peace. The truth is, there's a quiet crisis happening inside so many mothers' hearts. It's not always dramatic. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It sounds like, "Don't upset them," or "Just let it go," or "I'll do it myself." It shows up when you hide your own feelings to protect theirs, when you offer more than you have left to give, when you measure your worth by their approval or lack of it. Once said that the need to be loved is one of the most dangerous traps of the human mind. Now imagine that need being directed at your own child. It doesn't feel like a trap, does it? It feels like care, like dedication, but slowly that devotion can turn into emotional servitude, wrapped in the disguise of affection. And here's where it becomes especially painful. The more you give from fear, the less you are respected. Not because your children are ungrateful, not because they're unkind, but because when love is offered as a transaction, when it comes with strings attached, even silent ones, something precious gets lost. Your authority, your balance, your place in the relationship. You see, children, even grown ones, don't just need your help. They need your strength. They need your example. And if all they ever see is you bending, sacrificing, tiptoeing, they don't see a person. They see a role. A role they assume will always be there, always giving, never needing. And that's where resentment starts to grow, on both sides. You may be thinking, but isn't that what mothers are supposed to do? To give endlessly? That's the myth we were fed. That love means selflessness, that to be a good mom is to be a silent one, a patient one, a never tired, always available, endlessly loving presence. But here's the truth we must consider. Real love includes the self. If you have to disappear to keep someone close, that's not love. That's fear in disguise. And fear, my friend, is a poor foundation for any relationship. It leads you to say yes when your body is screaming no. It leads you to avoid hard conversations, to hand over your time, your boundaries, your peace, all in the hope that they'll approve of you, or worse, that they won't leave. But what if they're not going anywhere? What if the only person walking away is you? This fear-based parenting doesn't always start in adulthood. For many of us, it began long before we had children. Maybe you grew up in a home where love was earned through obedience. Maybe the only time you felt seen was when you pleased others. If that's your story, then what you're living now isn't just parenting, it's repetition. You're not just raising your children, you're trying to rewrite your own past, to finally earn the affection you were once denied. And that's the heartbreak of it. Because your child, your beautiful, complicated, growing child, was never supposed to carry that weight. They were never meant to be your healer. And when they sense even subconsciously, that your happiness depends on them, they pull away. They test more. They respect less. Not out of malice, but out of confusion. When boundaries are too soft, the world feels unsafe. When no is always negotiable, children stop trusting the yes. And when a parent tries to win love through endless giving, it teaches the child that love is something to be managed, manipulated, even ignored. It's hard to hear, I know. But there is power in this honesty. Because if fear can damage the bond, then courage can restore it. And it starts with one simple, radical act. Stop trying to please. You were never meant to perform love. You were meant to live it. To be a living, breathing example of what self-respect looks like. Of what it means to say, I love you, and because I do, I won't erase myself to keep the peace. You can still be nurturing without being a doormat. You can still give generously without abandoning your own needs. In fact, it's only when you stop running on empty that you can truly give it all. So if your child gets upset when you say no, let them be upset. If they pull away, let them pull. Not because you don't care, but because you care deeply, and you know that real love survives disappointment. Real love isn't built on compliance. It's built on truth. And your truth matters. You are not here to be a puppet whose strings are pulled by guilt, fear, or obligation. You are a person, a whole, complicated, worthy person, with needs, boundaries, and dreams that don't have an expiration date. If any of this stings, that's okay. It means it's hitting something real. And that's where healing begins. Not by pretending, not by pleasing, but by choosing to be seen as you truly are. Now take a breath. Let that land. And when you're ready, we'll keep going. Maybe you're wondering now, but if I stop trying to please them, what happens to our relationship? That's a fair question. The fear of rejection runs deep, especially when it comes to our children. But let's take a closer look at what's really happening beneath that fear. You see, many of us confuse rejection with disapproval. We think that if our child is upset, angry, or distant, it means something's broken. But emotional distance isn't always a sign of failure. Sometimes it's a sign that something is shifting, growing, even healing. Because just like a bone has to be reset before it can truly mend, relationships sometimes have to go through discomfort before they can find real balance. That discomfort, though, can be terrifying. Especially if you've spent years trying to be the good mom, the dependable one, the one who always shows up with open arms, open wallet, open time. But being dependable doesn't mean being endlessly available. And being loving doesn't mean being agreeable at all costs. It's often said that much of what we do in adulthood is actually a reenactment of our childhood wounds. If you find yourself constantly bending to keep the peace, ask yourself, did you have to do that as a child? Were you the quiet one, the peacemaker, the helper who didn't make waves? If so, it makes perfect sense why today, the idea of upsetting your child feels unbearable. Because deep down, you're not just afraid of their disappointment, you're afraid of reliving your own. But here's the beautiful thing. You're not that child anymore. And your child is not your parent. You are the adult now. You get to make a different choice. One that doesn't come from fear, but from truth. When you stop parenting from a place of unresolved hurt, you start parenting from a place of wisdom. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop seeking approval and start modeling strength. And that, my friend, is what your children need more than anything. They don't need a mother who never says no. They need a mother who can say it and still be kind. They need to see that love can be firm, that boundaries are not rejection, they are protection. And they need to know that your love is real enough to withstand their emotions. That's the shift we're aiming for, not to become cold or distant, but to become steady, rooted, a calm center in a storm of growing emotions and evolving dynamics. Because the more secure you are in yourself, the more secure your child will feel, even if they don't show it right away. And that brings us to something deeper. The imbalance that happens when the child holds emotional power over the parent. It's subtle, but incredibly damaging. When you allow your child, especially an adult child, to dictate your sense of worth, your emotions, your decisions, you're no longer parenting. You're negotiating your identity. And that creates confusion. Children, whether they're 5 or 35, are not meant to be in charge of your emotional well-being. That's not their job. And when you make it their job, often without realizing it, you burden them with a responsibility they were never meant to carry. That's not love. That's pressure. And what happens when someone feels pressured to love you? They withdraw. They resent. They pull away. And you, in turn, feel even more desperate to win them back. It becomes a cycle. A painful, exhausting one. But there is a way out. And it starts with reclaiming your emotional space. This doesn't mean being unkind. It means being honest. It means letting your no be clear and your yes be joyful, not guilt-ridden. It means showing up as a whole person, not a martyr. Because if you're constantly sacrificing your peace for their comfort, eventually you'll have neither. You'll be drained, they'll be distant, and the relationship will feel more like a transaction than a connection. So pause for a moment and ask yourself, when was the last time I did something just for me? When was the last time I said no, not out of punishment, but out of truth? When was the last time I stood still in the face of their disappointment and told myself, I am still worthy? These aren't easy questions, but they are powerful ones. Because when you start answering them with courage, something begins to shift. Your child starts to see you not as a background character in their life, but as a real, whole human being. And believe it or not, that's what deepens connection. Not pretending, not pleasing, but showing up fully. Now let's talk about something that may feel familiar. The moment your child dismisses you. Maybe they roll their eyes. Maybe they stop calling as often. Maybe they ignore your advice or take you for granted. That silence, it hurts. It's not just about words. It's about being unseen. But here's something that speaks to a deeper truth. When love becomes too available, when it comes without challenge, without tension, without boundaries, it starts to lose its meaning. Not because the love is wrong, but because it isn't rooted in truth. Children need to bump into your boundaries. They need to hear no. Not just to be disciplined, but to understand that you are real. That you are not just a giver of things, but a person with thoughts, feelings, and limits. That might sound harsh. But consider this. When everything is a yes, nothing feels meaningful. When love is given at the expense of self, it becomes guilt, not grace. And guilt in children becomes entitlement. It becomes a twisted understanding that the world owes them something, that you owe them something. And that's not fair to them, or to you. You are not a vending machine for affection. You are not a fixer of all things. You are a guide, a model, a presence. And that presence must be rooted in strength, not perfection, not control, but strength. So if your child resists the changes you're making, if they pull back, if they get upset, let them. That discomfort is part of their own growth. And it's part of yours too. Because what you're doing now is not just parenting. It's healing. It's breaking the pattern of fear-based love. It's stepping out of the shadows of guilt and into the light of self-respect. And from that place, real love can finally begin to grow. Let that sink in for a moment. You're not losing your child. You're finding yourself. And that is the most loving thing you could ever teach them. There's something sacred that happens when a woman in her 60s stops asking for permission to exist. When she finally releases the weight of always needing to be liked, especially by her children, and decides instead to be whole. It may feel unfamiliar at first, even wrong, especially if you've spent a lifetime tying your value to how others respond to you. But that's not love. That's survival. And you've survived long enough. Now it's time to live. Maybe no one ever told you this, but you have the right to be more than just a mother. You have the right to take up space, to have boundaries, to disappoint someone without crumbling inside. And yes, that includes your children, especially your children. This isn't about becoming harsh or selfish. It's about finally becoming honest. Because if your love is always a performance, if it's wrapped in silence, shame, or fear, then no one ever gets to truly see you. Not even your kids. And believe it or not, they need to see you. Not just the provider, not just the peacemaker, but the person, the woman, the soul behind the role. They need to know that you have limits, preferences, needs, that you are not invincible, that you feel deeply, that you have a voice and you are willing to use it, not to scold or demand, but to tell the truth. That's what builds respect. Not sacrifice, not endless approval, but authenticity. It's been said that what we repress doesn't go away, it returns, often in ways we don't expect. For many mothers, years of self-denial eventually surface in the form of burnout, illness, bitterness, or emotional distance. Not because they didn't love deeply, but because they loved without including themselves in the equation. And what begins as love, noble, generous, sincere, can become something far more fragile. A need, a demand, a transaction. And then comes the sorrow. After everything I've done for you, you've probably said it, or thought it. And there's so much grief in that sentence. Because it's not just about what you gave, it's about what you didn't get back. But love, true love, doesn't come with an invoice. It doesn't keep score. And when we do keep score, it's usually a sign that somewhere along the line we gave more than we had. We gave from fear, not fullness. We gave because we were hoping that if we did enough, we'd finally feel enough. But here's the truth. Your child never asked you to disappear for their happiness. And if they did, that's not your burden to carry. They are not your judge. They are not your mirror. They are not your emotional regulator. You are allowed to exist apart from them. In fact, you must. Because only when you stop tying your worth to their approval can they begin to see you clearly. Only then does the relationship have a chance to grow into something mutual, something mature. A place where love flows freely, not as obligation, not as reward, but as presence. So if you feel resistance, let that be okay. Resistance doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're shifting. And change is uncomfortable, especially in family dynamics that have been built on unspoken rules and quiet compromises. But you are not here to maintain old patterns. You are here to evolve. You are here to model a different way. And it starts with choosing peace over performance, boundaries over burnout, truth over tension. And yes, it will be hard. You may feel misunderstood. You may be told you've changed. You may doubt yourself. But please remember, you are not doing this to hurt anyone. You are doing it to finally stop hurting yourself. Let the silence come. Let the pushback happen. Let the discomfort rise. You are strong enough to hold it. And in time, something beautiful will unfold. Clarity, relief, respect, maybe even a new kind of closeness, one built not on dependence but on depth. This is what it means to love with integrity. To say, I am here, I care, and I matter too. So the next time your child tests a limit, and every instinct in your body screams to give in just to keep the peace, pause, breathe. Remember this, the world doesn't need one more tired mother. It needs one more healed woman. And your healing, your decision to reclaim yourself, is not just for you. It's a legacy. It changes the energy in the family. It gives your children permission to grow up, to stand on their own, to love without fear. Because when you stop parenting from guilt, you start leading from love. And that love, it's not loud or flashy. It's steady. It's grounded. It's the kind that can hold space for both joy and disappointment, both connection and distance. And that is what lasts. So if no one has told you lately, let me say it clearly. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not cold for needing rest. You are not broken for wanting more. You are human, and you are allowed to be whole. There is nothing more beautiful than a woman who has come home to herself, who no longer begs to be seen, but stands fully in her presence. That woman, she raises adults, not dependents, not people-pleasers, but souls who know how to love because they were raised by someone who finally learned to love herself. You don't need your child's approval to be worthy. You already are. And the moment you stop trying to earn their love is the moment you become free enough to truly give it. You've made it this far. That alone says something about the kind of woman you are. The kind who doesn't back down from hard truths, who's willing to look within, who still wants to grow. Not because she's not enough, but because she knows she's worth the effort. Maybe you're sitting in your favorite chair right now, coffee in hand, feeling the quiet weight of all the years behind you, the decades of giving, of stretching, of showing up even when no one saw. You may be tired. You may feel invisible sometimes. You may wonder if it's too late to change. But it isn't. The beauty of life after 60 is that you finally have perspective. You've seen enough, lived enough, lost enough to know that what matters most is peace. And peace doesn't come from pleasing others. It comes from living in truth. It's often said that repression, the silencing of our true feelings, doesn't make those feelings disappear. They go underground. They burrow. And eventually they show up as anxiety, resentment, even illness. So if you've spent your life saying yes when you meant no, smiling when you were breaking inside, giving when your soul was empty, now is the time to pause and listen to what's been buried. Because that voice inside of you, it's not weak. It's not selfish. It's the part of you that's still alive, still waiting to be heard, still capable of leading the next chapter of your life with clarity and grace. And here's what that voice wants you to know. Your love is enough, even if it doesn't look like it used to, even if it comes with boundaries now, even if it's quieter, slower, firmer. Your child doesn't need perfection. They need your presence, your real, grounded presence. The kind that can say, I love you, and I'm no longer willing to disappear to prove it. That kind of presence is healing. It teaches more than any lecture. It models more than any gift. It reminds your child that love doesn't always feel good, but it is always good when it's honest. Think of the women you admired growing up. Were they the ones who said yes to everything, who ran themselves ragged just to be liked? Or were they the ones who stood with dignity, who knew when to say no, who carried both softness and strength in equal measure? You can be that woman now, not because you've done everything right, but because you're willing to do one thing differently. Stop betraying yourself to be loved. And in doing that, you offer your child, your grown-up, complex, beautiful child, a new kind of inheritance. Not one of money or tradition or even advice, but one of presence, of emotional clarity, of courage. Let them watch you say no without flinching. Let them see you rest without guilt. Let them witness what it looks like when a woman stops performing and starts living. Because that is what they will remember. That is what will shape the way they love others and themselves. Will it be easy? No. There may still be moments of tension, of misunderstanding. You may still feel that old urge to explain, to apologize, to chase their approval. But now, you'll recognize it for what it is, a remnant of the past, not your truth. So breathe through the discomfort. Let it rise and fall like a wave. You are stronger than it. You are bigger than the role you've played. You are a woman with wisdom to offer, with love to give, and a self to protect. And when the silence comes, because it may, don't fear it. Don't rush to fill it with apologies or gifts or explanations. Sometimes silence isn't rejection. Sometimes it's reflection. Sometimes it's the space where new respect is born. One day, your child may come to you not just for comfort, but for truth. And when that day comes, you'll be ready. Not drained, not bitter, but steady. Because you'll have done the work, not just of parenting, but of healing. That is your legacy. Not just what you gave, but who you became. So if this message touched something in you, take a moment. Maybe it brought up tears. Maybe it brought relief. Maybe you finally felt seen. That's the power of truth. It doesn't scream, but it speaks directly to the soul. And I want you to know, your soul matters. Your presence matters. Your story matters. You don't need to earn love anymore. You are love. You are worthy, not because of what you do, but because of who you are. And the moment you stop trying to be everything, you become something far greater, real. So take this moment. Breathe it in. You are not too late. You are not too much. You are not alone. And if you found comfort in these words, share them. Share your thoughts in the comments. Let others know they're not alone either. Subscribe if you want to be part of a space where truth is valued more than perfection, where we grow together, slowly, gently, truthfully. Because this isn't the end. It's the beginning of parenting from presence, not fear, of loving without losing yourself, of finally choosing peace. And isn't that what we've always wanted? Here's to you, to truth, to love that stands tall, to the woman who no longer pleases, but lives. You're not broken. You're becoming.